Good morning or good afternoon for whatever time of day you're watching this presentation. I just wanted to start off by saying thank you for tuning into this presentation, clicking on it. I know this presentation was originally supposed to be in person. It's gotten postponed or changed the plan a couple of times now due to various reasons, but thank you for tuning in. With this presentation being virtual may or may not look better for you. I don't know, because I know you can watch this on your own time, and I'm sure that is appreciative as you guys are teachers and you're busy doing everything that you're doing that your teacher role encompasses. So thank you. Thank you for your time spent to listen to me speak, I guess. Um, so go ahead and introduce myself a little bit. I'm Sarah Holman. I am an occupational therapy student at the University of St. Mary. I am currently in my last semester of this OT program. Currently I'm finishing up week 10 out of 14 weeks of this capstone project. So by the time I'm recording and presenting this presentation now, I'm beginning to wrap up the course of this 14 weeks with this project. So during this project, my site mentor, so while I've been out on site in the Leeds School District, by the way, I've been mainly following Jessica at Summit Point Elementary and Trail Ridge Elementary, in case some of you don't know. But um, she has been my site mentor. And when I was talking with her about kind of like the progression of my project and the different presentations I'm giving, she kind of helped me reel in narrowing down the topic for this presentation, especially this one. Um, she wanted to help me kind of relate it to something that'd be more interesting to you and like what's necessary like for your classroom potentially. So I hope I achieved that today. I do have a feedback form I will present at the end of this presentation that I hope you guys fill out later, and it should be in the email or however it's sent out with this presentation. But when we were talking about this, I kind of how I narrowed it down to it is relating these ocular motor skills, which is the visual or the eye movements that are the movements that our eyes make during everyday activities and how they relate to different well-known pediatric diagnoses. So I know a lot of us hear about ADHD in the media, autism's in here as well. You guys probably know a lot more about dyslexia than I do. When I talk about dyslexia is just a very small piece of it. Um, and just how it relates to reading, basically. I do have a pretty cool thing I learned about reading in that section. And then how eye movements can be affected after someone has a concussion or a TBI. So, anyway, thank you. Let's go on into this presentation. If it'll move. Oh, I have to click. All right, so it looks like I have to record individual slides. That's okay. Alrighty, so why am I doing this presentation? Why does it matter to you guys? So the purpose of the whole presentation is to aid teacher-therapist collaboration on visual skills use in the classroom. I know Jessica's already really good at addressing visual perceptual skills, so you might have heard something about like visual memory, um, figure ground. I don't know how much into that, or like being able to copy shapes and letter formations from the board to the table. Um, but I'm addressing particularly an area of visual skills that we often don't think about, especially in the school setting. But this is going to be ocular motor skills, or another word for it, kind of a big word for it, is visual efficiency skills. That's going to be your saccade movements, which I'll talk about all these more, I think, in a couple slides. Saccades, smooth pursuits, accommodation, and convergence. I think I've talked about peripheral vision a little bit too. Um, and the reason why this is necessary is that these particular visual skills presented today are used in everyday activities like scanning your closet when you're getting dressed in the morning, trying to find appropriate items of clothing. So like on a cold day, you're gonna grab the sweater. On a hot summer day, you're gonna grab the t-shirt or whatever, however you're getting dressed to accommodate for the weather. Also for brushing your teeth and brushing your hair, you gotta be able to see the toothbrush and then you reach out to grab it, kind of knowing your awareness to that object, and your vision gives you input for your other sensory systems. I know Jessica has discussed other sensory systems in depth with you guys. Um, and then these particular vision skills, oculomotor skills, are also highly used in school day activities every day. So like reading, which I did mention a moment ago, that there is a little section in the dyslexia section of this presentation where I talk about how reading works visually and what the eyes are doing with that. I just found that very fascinating. And please let me know if you guys already knew that, because I feel like that might be something that was in your education when you were in school, but I don't know. I really don't know. Um, Also used in writing when you're typing, looking at the keyboard while your fingers are doing their thing, tracing, your eyes are having to follow whatever the pencil is tracing on the page, catching a ball, you're also taking in visual input from your peripheral vision, cutting with scissors, pasting something with glue on another sheet of paper, and navigating hallways. That's another one that gets into visual input from your peripheral vision. Right. Well, so for the objectives for today, I think it's going to be pretty straightforward in what we're discussing today. I'm going to start with defining those basic ocular motor terms, like I mentioned on that last slide: saccades, pursuits, accommodation, and convergence. And then we're going to take a look at that pyramid of learning diagram or picture. I actually stole that picture off of Jessica Lamb's presentation that she's presented to you guys as well on sensory processing, where she talks about proprioception and the vestibular system and all that stuff. And we're just going to take a look at the part of that pyramid of learning that mentions ocular motor skills. And you probably know all about that pyramid anyway. And then finally, we're going to look at how these oculomotor skills relate or may not relate to these different pediatric diagnoses that we often hear so much about, some more than others. Right. So, for those basic terms I was talking about, I didn't mention fixation earlier, but fixation is just the eye's ability to be able to stabilize on one object for a sustained period of time. Saccades is the ability for the eyes to be able to jump from one object to the next. I do have a couple examples I'm going to have you guys try for some of these things. You jump from one object to the next, jump back to the first one, or it doesn't even have to be two objects, it can be around the classroom. Um, and then pursuits is the eye's ability to smoothly track an object. Like if you're following a circle on a line, your eyes are slowly following the circle on the line. That's actually the example I have for you guys to do later. And then accommodation is the idea, one eye's ability to accommodate for the other eye that may not be seeing as clearly or as well, might be kind of blurry in one eye, and the other eye accommodates for it, for lack of better terms, I guess, to help see a better image that's one image instead of two separate images where one is blurry, one is clear. It helps for the eyes to work together. And that kind of gets into convergence a little bit, both eyes teaming together to see one image. They converge, like you have two eyes here and it goes to a point in the center, kind of like think about going to your nose. I hope that makes sense. And I will try to repeat any of these terms as they come up during this presentation. They may or may not stick from right now, just from the first time you hear it. I totally get that. But yeah. All right, I'm going to go ahead and leave video off for this slide or the next few slides. But this is an activity I want you to do. In the meantime, I need to get my metronome out. Should have done that a moment ago. So this is going to be an activity on saccades. And with the metronome, because I want you to listen to it, I want you to fixate your eyes on the eye on the left, and then on the next beat on the metronome, you're going to fixate on the right. You're gonna go left, right, without moving your head. I think I started moving my head. Oh wait, you can't see me anyway. But you're gonna move your eyes from your left to your right, left to the right. So I'm gonna get my metronome started. Left, right, left, right, left, right, left, right. Alrighty. Now I'm gonna do it for real now. Alrighty. I hope that made sense for you guys. You got another chance to try this. We're gonna do it on the next slide as well. So saccade movements can be done horizontal or vertically. So with saccade movements horizontal, that's used in reading a lot. You can also use vertical saccades that might often be used in math skills. So if you're carrying numbers or forgot what the word is for subtracting, but have to bring numbers down, go back up to the top of your math problem. Your eyes are going up and down along the math problem there. And there's math is not the only place for vertical saccades either. That's just a good example. Alrighty, get ready for your other attempt for vertical saccades. You're gonna look at the top eye and then the bottom eye. Top, bottom, top, bottom. Alrighty, that's just an idea for it. And I just want to make sure you didn't move your head either. If you did move your head, just go ahead and do it again or move on. That's okay. Alrighty, now this little activity is to try to simulate a pursuit movement. Or not try to, you should be able to do it, I would think. But what you're going to do here is you're going to fixate your eyes on the smiley face that's here on the screen. And ideally what it should do, because I tried to program it into the animations of this PowerPoint presentation, for that smiley face to go in a circle along the circle that you see on the screen. I hope it works. So make sure when you do this that you kind of like saccades and don't move your head, just move your eyes to follow the smiley face on the screen. And pursuits can be done in either direction. Alrighty, so here is that pyramid of learning image that I stole directly from Jessica Lamb's sensory processing presentation that she has presented to you guys at some point. And I went ahead and threw that in here because I noticed the perceptual motor development section, that orange yellow section in there, deliberately highlights ocular motor skills. It says ocular motor control, as you can see on that bottom row on the right side of the slide. And you also see eye-hand coordination. That kind of gets into what Jessica Lamb already does with a lot of students that she has on her caseload in occupational therapy with visual motor integration. I don't know if you've talked about that a little bit with her or not, but she works a lot with visual perception, which is more of the higher level visual information processing that goes on in our brains. Like it's what our brain does between we see an image on the table, like the letter D on the page, and then our brain making sense of what that letter D means. Because until it goes through our brain and we really process that visual information, the letter D is just a scribble on a page, which I will get into that more a little bit later too in the dyslexia section. Um, and then visual motor skills is the stuff that happens right before that to help you be able to make sense of what you're seeing on the page or on the board or whatever you're taking in from your environment. So now we're ready to get into really the meat of this presentation, I guess it is. Just kind of like that third objective that I mentioned earlier on the objective slide. But I want to start off with a little disclaimer here, which I kind of alluded to that earlier. I want to say that just because a student has a diagnosis of autism, ADHD, etc., whatever they may have, does not necessarily mean that addressing the visual system alone will fix all their behaviors. Vision is just one part in how we operate. This indicates a need to consider in-depth just as much as any other sensory system. So I know Jessica and really any OT already does a really good job of addressing the vestibular system, the proprioceptive system, their balance, their postural control, the way just they move their body, or the need to move their body if they feel like they're having to stay in one spot for too long, as I know you guys deal with a lot. So an example of that, ADHD may not necessarily cause a visual deficit. ADHD alters the neural connections pathways from the norm. I'm sure you guys basically already know that. And it is one of these that affects the performance of saccades. And this kind of alludes into the next slide. Is there anything I was going to say here? All right. So just to I kind of have separate notes here that goes with the screen, but I just want to start off by saying 15% of kids with ADHD have an ocular motor problem. This was based off of a 2023 systematic review that I learned about. And actually find this one. This was by another OT that I had discovered through this Capstone project. And research finds these students to have more intrusive saccades. I'll describe that more in a bit. Research finds that these students have more intrusive saccades when their eyes are expected to be focusing on a desired object. And these intrusive saccades happen regardless of distractions being present or not in their general vicinity. I'll go ahead and do a little side note here. Intrusive saccades means that the eyes are diverting one's visual attention away from the desired task. So if they're supposed to be looking at whatever assignment you've given them that's on their desk or whatever activities on their computer screen, and their eyes just kind of wander off to another way, just kind of with seemingly no reason to wander to another direction, but they certainly have the ability to get back, I guess, on task, as you can put it. But it's not doesn't necessarily mean that they're off task. Oh, the cause for this is often an inhibition deficit. This was the illusion I made on that previous slide. Just because something's going awry with their saccade movements doesn't necessarily mean there's an issue with it. It's something in a higher neural circuitry pattern that's going on. And we all often hear about ADHD, like their brains just work different. We know about this neurodivergent culture that we often hear about in the media. And I'm sure you guys are very passionate about that, and that's great. I love that. And from that same research, these intrusive saccades occurred with, I already said that, okay, I wrote that twice. So what does all this mean? By reducing nearby distractors may or may not help with reducing those intrusive saccades by by wanting to keep them on the desired task. Maybe allow extra time to attend to that task. Just they can come back to the task on their own. Just give them a chance to do it. Alrighty, so to get into autism a little bit, so a quick little overview. The general consensus that I found is that there's increased accommodation issues and decreased peripheral vision issues. Again, the accommodation is one eye's ability to accommodate for the other eye that may be kind of blurry or not seeing as well as the better seeing eye. It helps to focus the image into one picture in front of their face instead of seeing two images. Because we're not a horse. Horses see like this. Anyway, that's just something I learned at camp in 4th grade. And also decrease peripheral vision issues. I found this really fascinating because the decrease, because we often hear about those common autistic behavioral traits like toe walking, for example. But with decreased peripheral vision, they're not attending to all the visual information in their entire visual field between their central and peripheral vision. And when they're not attending to everything in peripheral vision or everything in just not have, sorry, I can't talk. They don't have that good interaction between the central peripheral vision. Something could be off with vestibular or proprioception in those areas, and that may result in that toe walking that we often hear about. And this decreased motion processing, because of the decreased peripheral vision, there was found a correlation with increased common autistic behaviors, which I kind of discussed a moment ago. The cause of this is the lack of communication between the motor system and the cerebellum, and where balance and the vestibular system take place, and the visual input coming in from the periphery. Alrighty, so the inhibition, I think I actually said that. Did I say that on the last slide? I think I did. But so when I was talking about ADHD, it's more so an inhibition deficit in a higher neural circuitry thing. If any of this makes sense, I do have a Padlet available at the end of this presentation for you guys to ask whatever questions, make any comments, discussion that you have. Sorry if this feels scattered, but you can ask questions then as well. I'm certainly open. But I was mentioning the inhibition deficit in the higher neural circuitry in the brain. There is some of that in autism, but just to a lesser extent compared to ADHD. I saw that a pursuits deficit seems to be more common. I'll discuss this further later in this slide. And they also tend to have like overshoots and undershooting on a target or desired object. So think back to that saccade activity that we did at the beginning, where you're jumping your eyes from the first eye on the left to the eye on the left, or the top and the bottom. They were overshooting it. Like kids with autism would often overshoot it. So if they're looking at the left and they move to the right, and their eyes go too far to the right, or if they go too far to the left, or if they go from the left to the right and it doesn't quite reach the eye to the right, that's an overshoot or an undershoot. Just kind of off, and that is different from an inhibitory deficit. They are trying to get to the desired object, they just miss it one way or the other. Some ways that you can see overshoots and undershoots in like functional reading tasks are when a student is skipping words when they're reading, or they're rereading words in the text. Rereading words, that kind of gets into vertical saccades. Like sometimes they might they get to the end of a line when they're reading, and they jump back to the left, as you do when you read, and they reread the same line. I've been guilty of that myself. Not that I have any of these conditions, but sometimes I'm like, wait, I just read that. But I did see with this that kids with autism do tend to do well with making these adjustments. So after they make an overshoot or an undershoot in their saccades when they're reading, they're able to find the desired object relatively quickly. They do pretty well with that to find the appropriate target. This is likely due to not attending to all the details in the scene. I'm going back to that peripheral vision thing. If they're not attending to everything in their peripheral vision in their visual scene, there could be missing some details. So this kind of gets into what you hear about autistic traits, like not attending to all like facial expressions, all social cues, basically just kind of missing some of those details that could play a role in that. It's just not attending to everything in the visual scene. And this is due to that limited connection between the central and the peripheral vision, which seems to be a common theme here, because that's going to also be in the dyslexia section. They tend to use their peripheral vision more for near tasks. So like when they're like looking like at their page, kind of like tilting their head to the side to see outside of it, because they're not having that communication between the central and the peripheral vision. They're just using the one area. This is you can kind of think of this as their version, I guess, of squinting. So like if you see like you know the common thing if a kid is squinting when they're trying to see the board, like they're trying to focus their eyes. That's more of an accommodation thing that kind of accommodating for one eye being blurry and the other eye helping to see a clearer image. It's kind of like that, but it's that communication between the central vision and the peripheral vision. It's their version of squinting. I hope that makes sense. All right, we can go ahead and move on to this. Um, so with dyslexia, I do have the article cited somewhere down in the reference section later in the presentation, but the frequency I found in this sample, I can't remember what the sample size was, but 46% of that sample had an accommodation deficit, so that's the limited ability of one eye to accommodate for the worse seeing eye that is kind of blurry or not seeing as well. 62% with a pursuit difficulty, so the smooth movements of the eyes following an object, like when you're tracing a line on a page or drawing, for example. And 34% had a convergence deficit, so that's both eyes teaming together to focus on object. Combination does play a role in that as well, but convergence is its own separate thing. Alrighty. Okay, this is gonna work. Alright, so I wanted to try to put in some more activities throughout this presentation. And when I came up with one for it to get into this reading, like into how reading works, this is the first part of of a reading task from a visual perspective. Sorry, that was a lot of words to not really describe much. I put this when I put this little presentation when I put this little video together. I was trying to think of a way to demonstrate fixations in like the certain amount of time it takes to um, fixate on a word before you jump on to the next. Because you have to be able to make sense of that word and it goes into your visual information processing, that visual perception, like I alluded to earlier, that Jessica often works with. And you have to make meaning of it, and that is often where it doesn't quite gel in the dyslexic brain. So I think I'll go ahead and just put this little video on. Yay. And that is not my algorithm. I don't know why that stuff popped up. But anyway, yeah. So basically what that was saying, I feel like I could have done that a little bit faster, but that's okay. I think I got the gist across. And the idea is that in the dyslexic brain, they really don't give themselves enough time to fixate on one word while they're reading, and then they jump onto the next one, and then they regress back. I will discuss that more here in a moment. Come on, there we go. Alrighty. So, as you saw in that last activity, fixations is just one part, or the first part, the former half of a reading task. I just found this really fascinating. Please let me know if this is something that you guys cover in your education when you become teachers, when you guys are in school. I feel like it might be something that is, but I really don't know. Please let me know. I'm really curious. But I just found this really fascinating, so I wanted to include it in the dyslexia section. So we already mentioned that fixation time is the first part. The second part is saccades. I do show that on another slide that comes up, but where it really gets messed up is between these two areas in the brain, the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area, that they're both language processing centers in the brain, but the part that doesn't quite convert the visual input well is right there in the middle between the two. That's the in-between space where both of those components communicate with each other. And the dyslexic brain, it really doesn't happen because they're not giving themselves enough time to fixate on one word before they move on to the next. And because they're not giving themselves enough time, they're not comprehending, they're not making meaning of that word. Not that they can't, because they can, they're just not giving themselves the amount of time that they need to do it. So they're constantly regressing back to that word, and that's why they get jumbled up and things get like just messed up, just messed around, and it just takes them a while to try to get a reading task completed. All right, so I wanted to kind of show what that looks like in the dyslexic brain and how it generally looks to us. So uh, the arrows here show the general like progression or regression really that dyslexic readers often make when they're reading. So they're looking at the first word on the line. And by the way, anywhere where I didn't know what kind of text to put, I just put random stuff. It's about dogs because I like dogs. But anyway, so they're fixating on the first word of the text. They see dogs. They move on to the next word. They're like make, and but they're doing it. They're trying to do it pretty quickly. Dogs make four, excellent, but they're not comprehending what happened. So their eyes are constantly making saccade jumps back to where they were. Sorry, let me back up a little bit. So they're fixating on dogs, and they make a saccade jump to make, and then they have a very short fixation time on the next word and make another quick saccade forward. Well, they didn't quite make meaning of that because of that area between the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area on that last slide. That's just not quite communicating the language between written word and what it actually means in their brain. So they're making these regressions, these saccade jumps back in the other direction, so from the right to the left, still a saccade jump. And that's where it starts to get jumbled, and they might get frustrated when they're reading, and they try to come up with ideas to make it easier for them. It's just not going to be an efficient pathway of getting the reading task done. But they are smart and they will try to get the job done, no matter how efficient or inefficient it is. I know with teaching dyslexic readers to read, they just need to be taught differently. This is where I'm saying that you guys probably know a lot more than I do on teaching dyslexic readers, which I would be interested in myself. But that maybe that could be a little discussion panel on that Padlet at the end of this presentation. But it's kind of a little sidebar conversation. But I'll go ahead and show the more normal one. So you see those red lines on the that I put between words is to kind of demonstrate like how many words we can generally see on a page. This always has to do with the font that the text is. So you're going to fixate on the first word, and generally you can see 1 to 2 words, or I think it's like 2 to 3 words, depending on the size of the font that you're reading. And then you can also see about 2 words before your fixation point and up to 7 words after your fixation point. This is pretty large font and it's on a screen, so I didn't have 7 words out because that's a lot to be able to see in your visual field if you're fixating on also. I have it for also. So if you're fixating on also, you can see the 2 words prior to that and about 4 words. That might be a little much for the size of this font after that. It varies from person to person anyway, but that's generally what people can see, or I guess normal people can see. And then saccade jumps happen the same way. You fixate on they, your eyes jump to the next word, jump to the next one with a sufficient amount of fixation time on each word, so you can allow time in that visual information processing in your brain between the Broca's area and the Wernicke's area where the interaction occurs to make meaning of the words on the page, and you can get comprehension of the words on the screen. And dogs are cute. So I guess that's basically the gist of this whole stuff. Dogs are cute. I'm kidding. Okay. Alrighty. Um, so post-concussion symptoms. So a little overview of that is that there seems to be an accommodation there can be accommodation deficits, pursuit deficits, and convergence deficits, or just convergence. And there seems to be a competition between visual input from the periphery and the central vision. Again, common theme with a lot of these ocular motor skills. Just some statistical stuff here. Uh, so about 40, this was again from one particular study that I have cited later in the reference section of this presentation. About 48% in that sample had a visual field deficit, so literally part of their vision was blocked or occluded. Like they didn't have visual input from one side, like they didn't see on the left side of their body, for example. That's going to be not as common in the pediatric population, but I still mention it because it's still a common post-concussion visual symptom. 40 to 48% have a convergence deficit, 30 to 47% have an accommodation deficit, and 6 to 9% can see double vision. The fancy word for that is diplopia, which I do have a fun activity. I hope you don't get a headache, but do you have a little fun activity for double vision on the next slide. But 10 to 30% with, and the other statistic that's not on the screen, 10 to 30% with another ocular motor deficit, because I'm going to get into here in a moment that a kid may not always have a diagnosis like ADHD or TBI, which I hope a kid doesn't have TBI, because that's awful, and that's a lot that they'd have to go through the health system. And also with post-concussion symptoms, there's photosensitivity, so basically sensitive to light, so being mindful of that. Someone with a TBI may have any combination of these things. There's a large probability, so they might have a convergence deficit and a accommodation deficit. They may only have double vision. It can vary. They may be sensitive to light and have a convergence deficit. And also some of these things, these kids may not necessarily know. Especially for a kid who see double vision that didn't have any of these diagnoses, whether they never had a TBI, they don't have well, that's really the only example for this. They haven't had a TBI, but they've always seen double, but they don't know they've always seen double because that's how they've always seen. And okay, I'm getting ahead of myself, but let's go ahead and do the activity. So I'm gonna have to move my thing here. That's okay. It's fine. I want you to go ahead and try to read this. I hope you don't get a headache. If you really do get a headache, just don't read it. But just try. Go ahead and try. And I know the little icon for this video is kind of blocking the bottom right hand corner of that, but I'm not too worried about it. Most of it's on the screen anyway. How do you guys do? Did you guys get that at all? Did you have any of the visual information processing happening in your brain? Any of the words that computed? Did you make sense of any of those words? You can mention something in the Padlet later if you want. But I am trying to observe a lot of the Padlet for feedback on the presentation as a whole, on really anything presentation style, content. But we can have some fun in there as well. So So I was trying to get into this a little bit on the previous slide with post-concussion symptoms. A kid may not have a TBI or ADHD or dyslexia or whatever, but they may have a strabismus disorder or amblyopia. Strabismus is just where the eye is turned in one way or another. Amblyopia is another word for a lazy eye. That's why I have the little girl with the eye patch here on the screen. I just a Google image search. You can't the kid in the bottom right hand corner. You can't see his turned eye, but you get the gist of it. There's plenty of examples here on the screen. Um, so these are the strabismus disorders, amblyopia, lazy eye, or like you can generally see if a kid has a turned eye, whether it's turned in, turned out, whatever. You can generally see that. So that's something you could bring up therapy, and then therapy can try to talk to the parents of the kids, see if they've had an eye exam just to make sure everything's squared away, everyone's staying in their own scope. But yeah, so they could have a strabismus or lazy eye instead of all these things. Just another thing that you could think about. Again, this whole presentation is really just to have this area of visual skills in the back of your head in case you happen to have some sort of concern with one of your students in your classroom that might be having something going on with their vision and their eyes. Just kind of keeping it in your back pocket. So when you do collaborate with therapy with a student about a student on your caseload, you have it, and you will have this presentation available to you. Alrighty, so here I was wanting to do a more engaging activity. I will send a word search that I put together, which I had fun making word searches. I finally learned how to do it. It was a lot of fun. But I will send the word search to you. So here are the rules. I guess you can take as much time as you want on it. I was going to do 5 minutes just for sake of time in the presentation if I were to do it in person, but it doesn't have to be 5 minutes. Instructions are: do not get distracted from the puzzle. Only do the first puzzle. So if I were to be there in person, I wanted to try to provide as many distractions as possible. That's why I said do not get distracted from the puzzle. So if you can play some distracting music, like play some of your favorite music that'll get you singing, don't sing along. Focus on the puzzle. Like open a window, or like open the blinds at least. Maybe see the birds outside. I don't know. I don't know what can distract you, but I was probably just gonna do some tap dancing steps because that seems to distract people, but can't do that right now. Um, do whatever you need to do to distract yourself, but I don't want you to get distracted. That's the challenge here. So, when I ended up printing out, I never printed it, but by the time I was about to be at the point to print the word search, I ended up taking off the word bank that's on the side. So go ahead and keep this slide up. You can pause the video, pause the presentation so you can see the word bank on the screen, and then you can fill out the word search on your page. Yeah, and then whenever you're ready, don't cheat. I would just say pause the video here actually to work on the word search. But when you're done with the word search, go ahead and unpause. And after you unpause, I'm going to move this blue square to see the answer key. And for the sake of space on your word search page, I did just delete the first two columns, the last column, and the top row just for space on your page that you have in front of you. But there's that. How do you do? I tried to put some funky symbols in there. You can do the word search if you want or not. I guess I should have said that. Here's the references. Again, thank you. I can't say thank you enough for tuning in to this presentation. You will see a QR code. I'm so glad the video is not covering the QR code. You see the QR code that's here on the screen to access the Padlet that I have created for you guys to ask questions, make any comments, and to start any points of discussion. I will be in on that to respond to whatever you guys may have to say. I also have, yeah, you should be able to click on the link if you get out of presentation mode. Yeah, the link is there as well if you want to click on that in the edit mode on the PowerPoint or however you're accessing it. I'm not sure how you're accessing it, but I hope it works for you. Yeah. Thank you.